We looked at some research from an organization called I4CP. I4CP is a company that we partner with in the United States. It stands for the Institute for Corporate Productivity. They're the largest network research organization of its kind in the US, and what they really focus in on are best practices of high-performing companies and contrasting that with practices of low-performing companies. Each year they release important information, and it's called their critical human capital issues. What was interesting is for 2012, 3 of the top 10 items on the critical issues list were all based around the topic of change. Now, what's a critical issue for them? So critical issue is an interesting math exercise. It's when a topic or an issue is rated very high on importance, but when asked how effective are you at dealing with that issue in your organization, the score is low. So it's the result of that gap. High importance, low on effectiveness, that's a critical issue. And as I said, 3 of the top 10 were all based on change. The first one was managing and coping with change. That was actually the number 1 item on the top 10. Right behind it, number 2, was managing organizational change. And then a little farther down the list behind that was embracing change in the current culture. And what was also interesting is as you went down the top 10 list was another issue that they considered a critical issue, or where they've got a gap between importance and effectiveness, was leadership development. In fact, it rated number 8 on the top 10 for high-performing companies. These are companies that are doing quite well in their markets. And it rated number 7 in importance for low. And there's obviously an interesting link between the two, because if you develop leaders properly, they can help you move the organization through change. When you actually elevate the discussion from the report and start to put it into the context of employee engagement during times of change, there's some fairly simple things that jump out at you. First of all, we all know that the employee's response to a change initiative will dictate the success of that change initiative. We all know that when it's poorly managed, it can lead to confusion, fear, and certainly a drop in productivity and performance in the organization. And we also know that change, depending on what it is, can ultimately impact employee satisfaction, alignment, and ultimately employee loyalty. And how many times have we seen, either in our own organizations or friends and family, a significant change go through an organization and the output maybe 6, 12, 18 months later is an exodus of top-performing talent. We certainly hear consistently things like worry, fear. Some cases, people get energized, maybe a bit refocused. These are the changes that we hear about all the time. So it's pretty clear to say that it doesn't matter what the change is, what the source of the change is, it triggers emotions. And they'll range from positive to negative, and sometimes even to downright angry. Now, the challenge with dealing with individuals is sometimes their reaction may not be anything to do with you or your organization. Sometimes it's scar tissue. Sometimes it's changes they've been through in previous organizations that now are bubbling up and resurfacing. And sometimes it's just the complexity of the change that might set someone off emotionally. But if you want to think about 3 things to focus on in getting my personal support for a change initiative, doing these 3 things will get me on side as an employee. First of all, making sure that I have some ability to be involved in the change process. Second, that I have a willingness to adapt to the change. And third, that there's a personal vested interest in the change for me. If those 3 things are present, I'm going to be more likely to participate and go with you on the change. These are all the top-line reactions that people have when change happens, but at the end of the day, that's the most important question people have. How will it impact me? And as leaders in organizations, we have to spend the time to think about all the different employee groups we have in the company and how to address that question, because without addressing that question clearly and from the start, you're going to be in tough waters. Certainly, leaders are responsible for managing change, but the HR functions are responsible for reminding leaders what their role is during the change process, and that it's their role to help enable change. Has anybody heard of the 20-50-30 principle? It comes from some research from a book called Resistance, Moving Beyond Barriers to Change. And what was interesting is they did some quantitative research and they found out that in most organizations, when change initiatives happen, 20% of the workforce is change friendly, 50% of the workforce are fence sitters, and 30% of the workforce are resistors. When we talk about the change friendly group, these are the people that we as leaders want to engage. These are the people who can help us drive change through the organization. These change-friendly people generally believe that change is necessary, it's beneficial, and they actively enlist others to support the change that's occurring. They try and seek out opportunities to also participate in that change and make it a success. The largest group are fence sitters. Anybody have any fence sitters in their organization? They're the kind of sit, wait, watch group, right? The challenge is while they're neutral at the beginning of the change, they can be influenced. And you have to pay a lot of attention to this fence-sitting group because they can be influenced negatively. So what you want to do is get to them quickly, try and understand what concerns they may have, involve them as early as possible in the change process, and generally just invest time in them and listening to them. And one of the reasons you want to do that is you can take some of those fence sitters and convert them into your change friendlies. But if you don't spend the time doing that, don't worry, the resistors will do it for you. Anybody recognize resistors inside their organizations? So resistors are tough. They view change as negative, and more than that, they actually actively work against the change that's happening. So they're active in their resistance and they try and enlist others to support it. Resistors, and this is the risky part, resistors, while they're a smaller group at 30% than the rest, they are the most vocal than the other two groups. And consequently, they have the ability to take more of those fence sitters and move them to the negative side of the equation, creating more resistance inside your organization, which increases the chance of your change initiative failing. So you have to spend a lot of time thinking about them. You may not be able to bring them on side. That may just not be in their mindset. But identifying who the most likely people are, understanding how vocal they might be, proactively trying to engage them, but also more importantly, messaging to those fence sitters early and getting getting them on your side as you go through the change initiative, that's the most important.